Redeem Academy. Hey, what's up, Science Squirrels? Johnny here. This is a very special video. I'm gonna be going over the workbook. Now, most of my videos are about the notebook. This video is gonna be about the workbook. Emphasis on the word work versus note. The easy way to tell them apart is the workbook is hamburger style, whereas the notebook is hot dog style. So if you look in your notebook, the second page has a lesson plan. And after you watch the lesson and take notes, you answer the big question in the notebook, you're supposed to move on to the workbook pages. Switch over to this hamburger, and you open up the workbook, and it's got worksheets in it. And it's got its own table of contents. It's not a lesson plan, but it tells you for lesson 1, there are worksheet pages 1.1 through 1.4, and those start on page 1. So you open up to page 1 here, and you see worksheet 1.1, worksheet 1.2, worksheet 1.3, and worksheet 1.4. So after every lesson in the notebook, you've got 4 worksheet pages that you're supposed to complete. Now for each unit, which is gonna include 8 lessons, my plan is to make one video going over the whole workbook, because the workbook's pretty straightforward, but there might be a question or two in each lesson, in each 4 pages of worksheets that you might need help. What are the directions for this little spot, or what are the directions for that little spot? So I'm gonna make a video over this whole workbook right now, and you can just come back to the video and there will be little breaks at the bottom of the timeline that show you, okay, there's lesson 1 workbook pages, there's lesson 2 workbook pages, and you can just zoom into the spot you need in the video to get help when you need it. All right, so here's 1.1. You're gonna see tons of exercises like this, where I basically bring back pictures from the notes and just ask you to remember what this is about. So this picture right here as an example, here's a guy, he's dead, his soul's leaving his body. Is that an idea that represents materialism or dualism? And you just circle what the right answer is. So in this case, it's dualism, okay? And you keep going. There'll be, at the start of every worksheet on 1.1, there'll be stuff to remember the last lesson, because there hasn't been a last lesson yet. You've just got some stuff from the first lesson. Okay, we're moving down. Process of elimination. So you've got usually terms that are in the notes. Those always show up with a little definition here that you need to fill in. Okay, I'll usually give you 1 or 2 of them. So we just saw dualism, so I'll give you dualism. So number 13, the belief that there is a physical and spiritual reality, that's dualism, B. Now, I'm not gonna play any tricks on you, so you can cross off dualism now, because it's not gonna show up twice. Okay, and you go through, do a few more of those. So I've got here manipulated and responding. Those are the 2 variables in an experiment. So I'll look for one of those 2 and find it for you. Here we go, first one, the variable that is changed by the person doing the experiment. Okay, the one that you change is the one you manipulate. It's called the manipulated variable. So I'm gonna cross off H, I'm gonna put H here. Here we go, 1.2. So number 1 gives you a little experiment. You'll usually see on the 1.2 worksheet or the 2.2 or the 3.2, I've got something creative and different for each lesson. So on this one, I gave you some scenarios, and you have to list the manipulated and the responding variable. And those are things you learned about in lesson 1. So different types of music are played to see if it makes a pet hamster run faster on its wheel. So we're doing something and then looking for a result. Here we have a nice pet hamster on his wheel running. Okay, so what's the manipulation that we did? We manipulated types of music. And you'll notice the instructions said identify the variables, by the way. So I always put the instructions right here. One thing I want to mention is, as a teacher and as a kid, I grew up in the public school system. I did not read instructions. Like, that was just kind of the way I was wired as a kid. I don't know, I was a poor reader. So the way I've built curriculum over the years is, if it's more than a fragment of a sentence, I'm gonna have to explain it to my class. Now, you might be the most wonderful homeschool kid in the whole world, and you would read 2 paragraphs of instructions and follow them precisely, but I try to give very short instructions, and if there's going to be more than a little bit of instruction, it's probably going to have to come verbally for my students in the classroom in the public school system. You're probably some perfect homeschool child who could take 2 paragraphs of instructions, but these worksheets are going to have very brief instructions, and there's a lot of repetition in what we do. So you may discover, like, I don't need to go watch these videos of Johnny explaining the workbook because there's a lot of repetition to what I do in the workbook, okay? Okay, so back to this. The type of music played was the variable that was manipulated, and the response that we look for, if you go back and read it, different types of music are played, that's the manipulation, to see if it makes a pet hamster run faster on its wheels. So the response we're looking for is the running and really the speed. We're looking at if it makes them run faster. So hamster running speed was the responding variable we were looking for. And so now you're going to have more scenarios, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, and a little picture that kind of helps you visualize what's being written here. And you just write down the manipulated and the responding variable for each one. 1.2 is always kind of a unique thing, or 2.2 or 3.2. Then we go to 1.3. And these are just usually multiple choice questions. Sometimes they're pictures, sometimes they're words. And so let's go down further and find one like number 6 here. Variables are, so we were just dealing with variables in that last one. Variables are constants. And a really good strategy for multiple choice questions is cross off things that you know aren't the right answer. So variables are constants, okay, maybe. Variables are changeable, well those are opposites, so it's probably not both of those. Variables are facts, okay. Variables are unchanged. I'm going to cross off unchanged, and I'm going to cross off constants because those basically mean the same thing. And then if you get stuck on one of these, you can go back to your notes. So I open up my notes and I look at number 9 and it says a variable, a thing that can change. And kind of the idea here is that you might go back and reread your notes. So a variable is a thing that can change. I come back over here. Variables are changeable. There we go. B, right answer. Okay, there's always only going to be one right answer. And so you're going to be picking the right answer out of 4 each time for worksheet 1.3. And then I'm most excited, honestly, about 1.4 because I always write little paragraphs that are teaching you or reinforcing what was in the notes. And so this is a paragraph, and each sentence is about Francis Bacon. And I say finish the sentence. So you're going to add something to this. It's fill in the blanks. So a little something, which in his day included science, inclines a man's mind to atheism. This is a quote from Bacon. But depth in philosophy brings men's minds about to religion. Okay? And so you can go by process of elimination and start reading them all because you'll be crossing them off. I'll usually probably give you one of the words if you come watch the video. In Bacon's day, philosophy included science. So he said a little bit of philosophy might make you an atheist, but if you go deep in philosophy, you're going to believe in God, you're going to become religious. Okay, and so that's what Francis Bacon had to say about that. So now we can cross off philosophy. I'm never going to trick you and have 2 of the same word in there. So you can cross that off. Now you got 4 words left for 4 sentences. And if you read the sentences, you'll learn things about Francis Bacon as you go. And then finally, the scientific method. So this paragraph of 5 sentences is about the scientific method. In a blank, the person running the investigation collects information, also known as data, about how things behave in the natural world. Now you can just start to realize some of these words don't make sense. In an manipulated? Nope. In an responding? Nope. In an empirical, the person, that doesn't really make any sense. In an experiment? Ooh, could be that. In an observation? Ooh, could also be that. Okay, so how do I narrow it down between observation and an experiment? In a blank, the person running the investigation. Well, an observation isn't an investigation. Another word for investigation is experiment. But you could always come back at the end if you had it down to 2 and try to go figure it out by getting the other ones narrowed down. Experiment. All right, now, so the question arises, what can we do to retain more of what we learned? So this is the forgetting curve. Basically, whatever you learn, here's 100% of what you learned from, say the lesson I just taught you. After a day, on average, you've forgotten about half of what you learned because it's only in your short-term memory. 2 days later, you've forgotten all but 35% of it. 3 days later, you've forgotten all but 23% of it. 4 days later, you've forgotten all but 18% of it, and it continues to dwindle and dwindle and dwindle, and maybe 7 days later, you're starting to bottom out where you're going to remember 10% of what I taught you. That's where this picture comes in. Now, I'm not sure why they have a picture of an email or a cell phone or people talking. I think it's them trying to say in real life maybe how you remember things. But basically, the idea is if you access the information again and again after you learned it, look at how the slope of the curve starts to diminish, like you'll never forget as much as you would have. And so this is why we do what is called studying. If we re-access that information over and over again, eventually that information gets stored in our long-term memory and it doesn't ever go away, or it takes a lot longer to go away. Because when we first learn something, it's just in our short-term memory. But if we keep accessing that information over and over again, eventually it starts to store in our long-term memory. So I put little bits of the information that you learned in lesson 1 back in lesson 2, back in lesson 3, back in lesson 4 in the workbook. So you have to re-access it and go back and look at it again. Now, you can do an even better job of that if you, on your own, go back and look at your notes once every 3 days and kind of review your notes. And then I put a test at the very end of the unit that's part of the curriculum you buy. And if you take that test and you study for that test at the end, you're more likely to remember all this stuff at the end and start to put it into your long-term memory. All right, 2.1, you have a soul. Who says that? Do materialists say that? No. Materialists are atheists. Dualists believe you have both a body and a soul. Okay, process of elimination. Let's do the first one. The blood that goes to the lungs. There's a big fancy word of science for that. It's called pulmonary. There it is. The pulmonary circuit is going to be the blood that goes to the lungs. Gonna keep going here. This is actually straightforward. I didn't do anything super creative on the top half of 2.2. Okay, here we have a guy cutting open a pig that is snoozing. He's not dead, which makes it vivisection. Okay, you guys can fill out the rest of those. One thing I do want to notice here is I took the diagram I had in the notes and I split it in two. So one of these is the pulmonary circuit, one of them is the systemic circuit. All right, here we have experiments just like in 1.2, and they're all about the circulatory system. Okay, so you can do these real experiments on yourself too, some of them. This one's actually interesting, what happens. After measuring baseline pulse rate, participants' faces are submerged in cold water while the breath is held and the pulse is measured. Okay, so this is a real effect. When you put somebody's face in cold water, their heart rate changes. You should try it at home. So manipulated variable is putting the face in water. Face submersion, I'm going to call that submersion. And responding variable they're looking at is heart rate. All right, moving on. 2.3 is very straightforward. You've seen this before. Words with multiple choice questions. See if I can find a hard one. Well, we've already seen that the word for lungs. So what's the word for body? It is systemic. There you go. Okay, moving on to 2.4. I'm only going to give you one of these on this one. I give endless thanks to God Almighty who has chosen me to reveal the intricate and marvelous blank of his most divine handiwork. That's a quote from Andreas Vesalius. The most intricate and marvelous structures. He was the guy who studied anatomy, which is all about structures. All right. William Harvey is the second paragraph. I'm going to keep zooming here. All right, so here's 3.1. Okay, starting to work on that forgetting curve. Here's Harvey's focus. It was not anatomy, it was physiology. Okay, you start losing these names if you don't bring them back to your memory and start trying to store them in your long-term memory. All right, here we go. Matching all the new terms from this lesson. Let's go with the key device of microbiology that was greatly improved by Leeuwenhoek. That was the microscope. Going up to 3.2 here, just a few multiple choice questions. You can handle these, although you need to start to be able to recognize the different structures of microbes. So this little guy right here, how is he different than that guy right there? How's he different than this guy right here? Okay, the big difference, this guy has underwear around his DNA, so he's a protist. Keep going. This is really simple. I just hear kids say the word telescope all the time when they mean microscope, so I'm just trying to drill down on that and make sure you know the difference. So, a bacterium, you're going to be looking at that with a microscope. A black hole, you're going to be looking at that with a telescope. Okay, and just keep going, put an X for each one, okay? All right, 3.3, let's go to single-celled things without a nucleus. If you don't have a nucleus and you're single-cellular, you're a bacteria. Okay, keep going. Next page, 3.4. Oh, a lovely paragraph about Van Leeuwenhoek. Van Leeuwenhoek was the first person to observe and describe microorganisms, and he had a funny name for them called animalcules. And he didn't spell it the way I would have spelled it either. Animalcules. And if my permanent caps lock function being turned on all the time hasn't started to bother you, I'm really impressed because my students complain about it constantly. All right, we're gonna keep going. Whoop. 4.1, hey, we just hit the 9 box. That means there's a lot of things to review. Do you remember all these faces yet? You can't forget that mustache. That's Semmelweis. Okay, matching, here we go. All right, let's go with probably one of my top 5 favorite scientists, James Tour. Let's find him. A chemist who criticizes the claim that life arose by abiogenesis. That's my boy James Tour, F. That's one freebie for you. All right, here we go. Now this is a pretty hard one. I should probably give you 2 of these. I tried to have these written in the simplest form possible. Okay, here we go. Pasteur injected some sheep with a weakened form of anthrax bacteria and then exposed all the sheep to a stronger strain of anthrax. So anthrax is a spore, so he injected them with a weak form so that their immune systems could get strong, and then he exposed them to the spores. The sheep that had received the weakened bacteria survived, while those that did not died. Okay, so the manipulated variable, this is hard to read, some of these. The manipulated variable was whether or not they got the anthrax vaccine or the anthrax exposure. So we're gonna say exposure to weak anthrax. Responding variable, death after exposure to strong anthrax. That's a little more detailed than you probably would have written it, but that's what happened, okay? So he did a thing, and then he looked for a response. Pasteur was kind of a stud muffin, how many different experiments he did. He was super hardworking. Gotta respect that guy. So all of these experiments involve Pasteur. These are all real experiments that he actually did. So good luck with that one. Moving on, here we go, got some pictures. 4.3, we got Pasteur, we've got his flasks. So I guess I already said it, so let's call this guy Pasteur and move on. That's Pasteur. All right, rabies treatment, Pasteur. Here we go. Rabies was, and still is, almost always fatal once symptoms appear, making it a terrifying disease. Before Pasteur, there was no something treatment. 9-year-old treatment? No. Virus treatment? No. Developed treatment? No. Immunity treatment? No. Effective treatment? Yes. Ding, ding, ding. Effective treatment. And rabies often led to death through severe symptoms. All right, moving on. On to 5.1. All right, got some review here. Study of treating and preventing disease. Medicine. All right, short ones. The idea that complex design implies an intelligent designer. Oh, it's the watchmaker argument. Boom. The watchmaker argument basically is intelligent design. All right, 5.2. You're gonna need my help on this one. So this is a perfect example of where the 0.2 worksheet, whether it's 1.2 or 5.2, is a little bit of a creative thing that isn't outlined perfectly in the notebook, okay? So this is called a food web. So I've taken creatures from the Galapagos and I've put them into a food web. And now I've given you the terms at the bottom. Producer. Producers are things that produce their own food, usually from the sun. And consumers are things that consume others to get their food. Okay, and we've got 1st degree consumers, 2nd degree, 3rd degree, 4th degree, 5th degree. Now, notice I have an asterisk right here that says use more than once. You're going to use all these terms more than once except for the 5th degree consumer. You're only going to find one 5th degree consumer out there. I'm going to give you a couple of hints. I'm going to label a couple of the producers for you. Hint, hint, all the producers are going to be plants. But here's a fern. That's a producer. Okay, and then here is some algae. This is supposed to be underwater, and I'm going to label him a producer as well. Now you can go find the other plants and label them producers. You might be able to see all of them right now. Now, consumers eat other consumers or they eat producers. And so this marine iguana right here eats algae, so he's a primary or a 1st degree consumer because he eats algae. And because he doesn't eat anything else, he's only a first-degree consumer. Now, he gets eaten by something, so let's follow the arrow. The arrows indicate which way the energy goes. And so the energy that's in him then goes all the way up to this hawk, okay? And we're gonna show this hawk as a secondary. I'm gonna leave some more room around this hawk because you're gonna find he's gonna be many different types of consumers. So I'm gonna put secondary and then I'm gonna write the word consumer way over here because you're gonna discover he's gonna be many types of consumer. So he's a secondary consumer when he eats the marine iguana. Now, another thing that's going to eat this producer is this fly. Now, I don't know if this fly actually eats this plant, but we're doing like a big picture idea of a food web here. So we'll say this fly sometimes chews on this fern. So that makes him a primary consumer because he ate a producer. And then he gets eaten not by the hawk, but he gets eaten by one of the finches on the island. That turns this finch into a secondary, and I'm just going to write the word consume because I don't have a lot of room and put a dot there. And then we're going to say the hawk eats the finch sometimes. Now, since he's a primary or a first-degree consumer, he's a secondary consumer. This guy ate a secondary consumer, so now he's a third-degree consumer. So sometimes he's a second-degree consumer, sometimes he's a third-degree consumer. And you can see how, depending on who you eat, you're 1 degree higher of consumer than that, okay? And you're gonna have to go around and look at all these arrows and see who eats who and figure out what degree consumer they are. And this guy in particular, he's gonna be a lot of degrees of consumer. And as you work your way up the food web, you're going to have higher and higher degrees of consumers, but sometimes they're also pretty low degree consumers. It's going to be a fairly challenging worksheet for you. This worksheet, 5.2, is probably the most complicated thing in this entire workbook. All right, 5.3, we have same old things. Let's go with this one. Use and disuse causes evolution. That is Lamarck's incorrect idea. All right, 5.4, William Paley. Here we go. William Paley was a blank clergyman and theologian best known for his arguments for the existence of God. He was also the only word that's going to work here is philosopher. Moving on to 6. All right, 6.1, we've got Paley. Oh, whoops, I just told you who it is. Paley. Okay, and you got some more review. Moving up to matching. Let's go with, let's find uniformitarianism. The geologic principle that the forces we observe today have operated in the same manner gradually shaping the planet's surface. 14F. There you go. All right. I like this. Circle the fittest. So to be the fittest means you will survive and reproduce the most. Green bugs and yellow bugs live in green grass and need to avoid a predator who hunts by sight. So who's going to be the fittest in green grass? Green bugs are going to survive the best. All right, that's pretty straightforward. You will do the same for all of these scenarios. Okay, 6.3. Circle the best answer. Bum, 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 bum. Let's go with this picture. Unlike uniformitarianism, this is catastrophism. All right, 6.4. Before Lyell, many geologists believed in, hey, I think this was the word we just circled. Tons of room for this one. Catastrophism. The idea that many of Earth's formations, such as the Grand Canyon, were made by massive catastrophes. Okay. Moving on. 7.1. All right, we've got all our people here. Some review in the middle here. What was Darwin's good idea? That was human evolution. Natural selection. All right, here we go, matching on the bottom. The shape of a DNA molecule. It's called a double helix, D. Okay. Oh, I love this page. Took me a while to get all these pictures, but circle the object with the most specified information. Specified information, you can kind of think of it as just stuff that looks like it's on purpose. Okay. I didn't even know, funny story, I didn't even know you could take apart fingernail clippers until I had children. And for some reason, whatever children will do is probably the opposite of specified information. Most of the fingernail clippers in my house look like this on a daily basis. Okay, so specified information is when things look like they were done on purpose by an intelligent agent. This is how fingernail clippers are supposed to look. This is the chaos that ensues when you have children. Okay, and have fun with those. I'll give you a hint on this one. This is the statue of Jesus that's in Brazil. I was going for a big block of marble on this one that is unsculpted, okay? That's a Rubik's Cube that hasn't been solved. That's a solved Rubik's Cube, okay? Those are those little blocks you play with when you're a kid. All right, moving on. 7.3, what's that arrow pointing at? It's pointing at a nucleotide, all right? More of the same on 7.3. 7.4, from 1856 to 1863, a Catholic friar named Gregor Mendel. Oh, I think I put the wrong name right here. That's a mistake. I'm gonna go fix that. From 1856 to 1863, a Catholic friar named Gregor Mendel did meticulous experiments using blank pea plants to develop the basis of modern genetics. How many pea plants? 28,000 pea plants. Ka-chow. 28,000. I got both my Charles Lyell and my Charles Darwin wrong on this video, but I will have that fixed before you purchase the workbook. 8.1, there's my boy Mendel right there. Okay. More information you should be able to handle. Matching, Schwann. Let's find Schwann in here. One of the founding fathers of cell biology. C. Okay. Label it. 8.2. Well, let me give you, the words are down here. Let's see, what's hard to label? I don't think anything's hard to label, but let's label, I think we're going for bushings right here. So I'm gonna say 7 is bushings. There's your charity. All right, and 8.3, let's go down to number 10. Irreducibly complex. Is a chair irreducibly complex? No. You could take parts out and still probably get it to stand up straight. Like take one leg off, it'll still function. You might fall over, but no. Is a toe irreducibly complex? Probably not. Okay, it's a pretty big thing. An ice cube? Definitely not. Just a big block of ice. But a pocket watch? Yes. You need all those parts for that thing to tell you what time it is. All right, and finally, Schwann and Behe. Theodor Schwann was a German scientist and devout Christian who had helped develop blank. Cell theory, that's his jam. All right, there it is, cell theory. All right, so there is the workbook. You probably didn't watch that video all at once, and maybe most of that video wasn't very helpful to you. Give me some feedback if there's something you'd like me to do different in the workbook video, maybe a different way that you'd like me to give you some of that information. Have a great day. Peace out, Girl Scouts.